I got to give credit to James Harden. I don't believe in 2023 that James Harden is a system, but prime James Harden is like the definition of a system. Welcome back to the Kenny Beecham podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be grading the offseason acquisitions that you just saw, from Damian Lillard all the way down to Jordan Poole. Now, I don't want to say that's a diss to Jordan. Jordan, we're going to talk about why you at the bottom, all right? Be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. I've been telling y'all that my goal is to become the #1 basketball podcast in America, and we've been steadily climbing up the charts. Last time we talked, we were number 4 in basketball podcasting, which is amazing. So again, I want to say I appreciate you for that. But I found out today that the charts that I was looking at were faulty. And if you look at the Spotify top sports podcast, you just scroll down just a little bit, you will see the number 7 sports podcast in America is this little show. The Kenny Beecham podcast is number 7 in all of sports. See, our goal was to become the #1 basketball podcast in America. We've found our way into number 7 in all of sports, and the 6 shows above us are football related. So you can make the argument that we've already achieved the goal as the #1 basketball podcast. The one caveat is Bill Simmons is above us, and Bill Simmons is basketball and football and interviews, and he does a lot of stuff in his show. But for the most part, you can make an argument that this is #1. And I appreciate you for that. But now we're moving the goalposts. We're no longer just trying to get #1 in basketball, because, well, that was easy. We want, I'm going to say it, I'm going to be delusional for a second. We want to get the #1 podcast, sports podcast in America. And that's going to be tough, because anybody telling you that basketball can compete with football on any front is lying to you. If the 6 shows above us are football related, that must let you know that the market for football is crazy. So not only am I talking to Shannon Sharp no more, we passed that, Shannon. Shout out to you. We're now talking to Travis Kelce, Jason Kelce, and the Swifties. We coming for the #1 spot. And I can't do that without your help. So leave a like, 5 stars on Spotify and Apple. Thank you so much. Let's get into the basketball talk, ladies and gentlemen. Let's grade the top acquisitions that we just saw this previous offseason. Another legendary offseason. I want you to sit back and think about all of the crazy things that went on and compare it to some of the other years. This was one of the better ones. It just was. A guy of Damian Lillard's caliber doesn't get traded very often, and we got that. Jrue Holiday's, Porzingis of the world don't get traded super. Well, that's not true. Player empowerment got everybody moving left and right. But let's talk about it, because I'm doing this on a very traditional report card scale, A through F. We're not tier ranking, so there's no S. And I do want to say I'm only using the 2-week sample size that we have. I'm not trying to project or predict how this combination of players and teams might look, but just on the 2-week sample size, how we grade them, and maybe we dive back into it after a month or 2 months or so on and so forth, and see if things have got better or gotten worse. The biggest offseason acquisition was Damian Lillard being acquired by the Milwaukee Bucks. One of the craziest and more unexpected trades of recent history. I gave it a C. The Milwaukee Bucks don't look like the team that a lot of people anticipated. And again, give it time. I believe that it will get better and better and better. But one of the reasons I was so excited about seeing Damian Lillard in the Milwaukee Bucks jersey is obviously he was going to be playing alongside arguably the best player in the world. No lower than number 2. And I thought the match was so perfect, with Damian Lillard being one of the best pick-and-roll players in basketball because of how much of a threat he is from beyond the arc and getting into the basket. And when Giannis being this freak, this freight train get into the rim, I thought for sure we were about to see pick-and-roll after pick-and-roll after pick-and-roll, and that it was going to be unstoppable. We're not seeing that. Actually, we're seeing it a lot less than anybody anticipated. The first game of the season, we saw it like 11 times. And since then, we got single digits. And they played against the New York Knicks the other day. A little aside, I respect the New York Knicks heavily. I respect Tom Thibodeau as my former coach here in Chicago, as if I was on the team. But you get what I'm saying. They have something about their team that makes them so hard to watch. I respect them. And I think they're going to be good, even though they started off out the gate pretty slow because Julius Randle can't hit a shot. But it's something about the viewing experience that's missing. They played against the New York Knicks. I'm like, okay, nationally televised game. We were told that Adrian Griffin had a meeting with the veterans of the team. So maybe they do things differently. Maybe they will start with a pick and roll and start doing it pretty often. And guess what? The very first play of the game was a Damian Lillard, Giannis pick and roll. I'm like, here we go. They starting off with it. They going to do it again and again and again. They still didn't do it a lot. But the first time they did it, it ended in a Giannis bucket. And I just don't really understand how they just don't run it enough. Because the numbers are saying, this is for the team. This is not just talking about Damian Lillard and Giannis. But for the team, points per possession on a pick and roll is 1.05, which is second in the entire league. So when it comes to the effectiveness of a pick and roll, again, we're not even just talking about Dame. We're talking about pick and roll opportunities from the minutes restriction, Chris Middleton, or pick and roll from this player and this player. It is a 1.05 points per possession, the second in all of ball. But the problem is the frequency, which is all the way down to the 22nd. Now, that is not like a Damian Lillard team. And I think first-year coach Adrian Griffin is learning on the fly. I mean, we have to acknowledge the fact that Terry Stotts, who was in charge of the offense, walked away from the team right before the season started. And because of that, that's why I'm assuming we're seeing the offensive woes as far as the lack of P&R. But there's also one thing that's bothering me about this Damian Lillard thing, because I'm giving it a C. I don't know if I said that off top. I'm giving the Damian Lillard-Giannis combination a C right off rip. It hasn't looked pretty. Another thing that's bothering me is that we've seen the shots per game for Dame and Giannis drop off. Now, I'm giving it time. They're adjusting the plan with each other. But to see Damian Lillard's shots per game drop by 6, and then also see Giannis' shots per game drop by 5, it's wild to me. They're averaging 14 and 15 shots per game, respectively. And I was like, okay, how does that really compare to some of the other elite level duos across ball? Where the Jays are still getting up 20 shots a game. Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid are still getting up 20. So, there has to be this balance where we recognize who Dame is and who Giannis is and start to give them more possessions, because that's going to be better than pretty much any other shot you could really get. So the P&R is something that we're not seeing a lot. But the thing that I am the most worried about, or at least I was until the Knicks game, and I'll explain why, it's the defense. Because before the Knicks game, they were one of the worst defensive teams in basketball. If you eliminated all the garbage time, they were 29th. And if you added that garbage time, they were the worst defensive team in the history of basketball. I like to take out the garbage time because for the most part, that's not a good representation of what Giannis or Dame or the starting 5 is going to do. That's like, I don't know, AJ Green and all of the Livingston and stuff. That's not really indicative of the starting lineup. The defense had been bad. And then they played against the Knicks. And I'm like, hold on. This is the defense I'm used to from the Milwaukee Bucks. And why it changed is early in the season, talking about the first 3 to 4 games of the season, it was very apparent that they were trying to force as many turnovers as possible, where they were bringing Brook Lopez up to the point of attack and having him head screens pretty heavily, trap the ball handler, which is completely different than what made Brook Lopez one of the most defensive-oriented players in basketball. Remember, he usually runner-up for DPOY, and they completely changed the scheme and put him in a position that he's just not really built for. And because they're going out and trying to cause a lot of turnovers and things, the defense was very porous. We knew that their defense was going to be bad. They traded away Jrue Holiday. They're telling Malik Beasley, Malik, this is your job to go defend the best player on the other teams. Malik Beasley not really like that. So to also tell Brook Lopez that he has to stay away from the basket was just different. And then the next game happened. And this is something Adrian Griffin said after the game. Sometimes as coaches, we're too smart for our own selves. And so a couple players came to me. I won't disclose who, but they wanted Brook deeper and drop, and I was smart enough to listen to him. And guess what, y'all? They went from a team that was allowing 87% from the field, at least in the painted area. When you got to the painted area in the first couple games against the Milwaukee Bucks, you were shooting 87%. And in that next game, it was 57.1. Brook Lopez was blocking everything. Also, shout out to Julius Randle because he helped this, because he missed every shot that game. So the defense, I think, is going to get better and better and better. But the real question is, when it matters the most, and we're talking about playoff ball, can you find a way to get either Damian Lillard to buy in or to hide him? Because the Damian Lillard individual experience has not been good defensively. And now that the offense is not the Damian Lillard offense that we expect, it's like it's not outweighing itself. So I'm going to give it a C off rip, but I do anticipate with the defense getting better and them starting to realize the offense a little bit, it will get higher. But right now, maybe not as good as we anticipated. Now let's talk about another team that made some big old changes this offseason. A team that had been a team that was known for its continuity We saw Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, and Jason Tatum play together for so very long with Al Horford there as well, and they decided to make some changes. The heart and soul Marcus Smart is now in Memphis, and they brought in Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, and boy, oh boy, this right here, this team right now is the last undefeated team left in basketball. Now, I'm not discrediting it or anything, but they've had a cupcake schedule so far, which is okay. What differentiates a team that is good versus really good is taking care of business. And that's exactly what they've been doing. But today they play against the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm just a little bit intrigued by the matchup against the Timberwolves. I'm not saying the Timberwolves are these world beaters or anything, but they've been playing good basketball. So have the Celtics. It's one of my most anticipated games for tonight, and we'll see if the win streak stays alive. But still undefeated a couple weeks into the season is a huge dub. Jason Tatum is playing like an MVP caliber player. The Jays is looking, or Jaylen Brown is looking so good that I haven't seen a single person make a tweet about his contract. That's how we gauge what type of performances Jaylen Brown is having. If people bring up $300 million, then he must be struggling. If they not, then he's doing all right. They have this luxury of having Jrue Holiday and Porzingis on the team. Jrue Holiday so far this season has been so very good, but still, he's maybe the fourth most impactful player. You can argue he might be the fifth most impactful player, and that's not meaning that he's bad. But the Jays, Porzingis, and bald Derek White. But listen, I made a joke or video years ago, maybe 5 years ago, on my first official show when I was kind of filling some things out, called The Foul Shot. You might be able to find it on YouTube, or maybe not. I might have unlisted those videos, where I made a joke telling LeBron to finally call it quits with the hair. And still, here we are 5 years later, LeBron still got his hair. But just trying to make the joke that when MJ cut his hair, his numbers went up. Derek White just did the same thing. Cut his hair, and he's already one of the more impactful players in basketball. But don't ask ESPN, because they didn't have him in the top 100. He's one of the best defensive guards in all the ball, and now he can't miss. So you can make an argument that this season, so far through the first 2 weeks, Derek White has been the better player than Jrue Holiday, and that is a crazy luxury to have. When it comes to backcourts defensively, there are not teams hanging with Derek White and Jrue Holiday. So Derek White, in his Celtics tenure, has missed 2 different games. One of them was in the Eastern Conference Finals last year, and that is when his first child was born. And then the second time he missed a game was a couple nights ago when his second child was born. This man does not miss games unless it's to bring a life into the world. So congratulations to the White family. But with him being out, I was very interested to see what's going to happen, because the Boston Celtics, though they're like very good and 6 deep up top, it's like 7 through 10. You're like, oh, okay, Sam Hauser, we can believe in that. Luke Cornett, maybe a little bit. Peyton Pritchard got paid. So without him being in the lineup, I'm like, okay, how is this going to go? Jrue Holiday just filled all the holes. Simply just did that. And then Jason Tatum scored his 10,000 point. It was pretty easy. Well, it wasn't an easy game, but they made it look easy, while just letting Jrue Holiday be the all-star caliber player that we know he can be. Porzingis has been this revelation, though. Porzingis playing in Washington had a really good year. And if you were really into it, you noticed that, right? I cannot say that I watched a ton of Washington Wizards game last season, but I definitely was keeping up with Porzingis, and he had a really good year. But more than anything, he had a healthy year. And that was one of the reasons why Brad Stevens felt pretty confident in trading for him and extending him without seeing him on the floor, because he was just coming off a really good year, probably his best year since his All-Star appearance in New York. And so far, he's looked amazing. He gives this ability to protect the paint and also stretch the floor like no other. But there are some things, and the things that I'm looking out for when they go against the Bam Adebayos, the Joel Embiid, and the Nikola Jokic a couple times a year, maybe even in the NBA Finals. How will he fare? Because in the one game against the Miami Heat, Bam Adebayo's kind of taking it into the chest of Porzingis over and over again. So I'm just interested to see if they have like a full series against some of those players. How do they scheme for it? But when it comes to a day-to-day basis, game-to-game basis, Porzingis is the perfect fit for what they want to do. Mazzulla Ball, I won't say it's simple because I'm not playing it. I'm not running the schemes and stuff. But from a viewing perspective, it's kind of a simple game. Get 3-pointers up, get to the basket. And Porzingis can help you do both of those things from a 7'3" frame, which is crazy. I am grading both of them, because we're doing it collectively here, an A. And the only reason it's not an A+, is you got to be perfect to get an A+. And I'm not saying it aloud. Maybe they deserve an A+ because they are literally the only team in the league that is still perfect. I'm going to stick with an A right now. Shout out to Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. Now let's get to my favorite offseason acquisition, Christopher Emmanuel Paul with the Golden State Warriors. Man, I was so hyped for this one. I didn't really know what it was going to look like, how it was going to fit, especially when we talk about the history between Draymond and Chris Paul or Chris Paul and the Golden State Warriors. Y'all, it looks good. Now, I'm saying this right now, right after I watched them, or I guess Chris Paul put up a stinker against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I had it ranked as an A. I don't think I could keep it at an A. I'm trying to think about it. If I gave Jrue Holiday Porzingis an A, I can't give Chris Paul an A, right? I'm gonna give it a B plus, which just lowered just a little bit on the fly because he's struggled today. But I do want to say he's not averaging crazy numbers. Before the game, he was averaging 8 points, 4 rebounds, 9 assists. In the game, he didn't really score. He didn't get an assist. So these numbers that I'm reading to you are not even up to date anymore because he's worse now. But he was shooting 33% from the field, 4.8% from 3, and 81% from the free throw line. You're like, Kenny, how can you even give that a B plus if he's averaging less than 10 points per game and he can't hit threes in a system that's heavily 3-point related? Because he adds a different element to the Golden State Warriors. If you look at the history of Steph Curry, especially since he hits all-stardom, there's only been one time in his NBA career where his off-net rating was positive. And for y'all that don't really recognize what that means, anytime Steph Curry went off the floor, his team was horrible at maintaining whatever job this man had done. The one time that they were a plus with the net rating was in 2017, 2018, and it was a plus 1.19. So barely above average, barely above okay. This season, again, before the Cavaliers game at least, the net rating was a 20.38. Now, I'm not expecting, I'm definitely not expecting that to hold. But I do believe that Chris Paul in that second unit will be the best second unit, the best unit when Steph Curry's off the floor in the entirety of Steph Curry's career. And a lot of that is given to Chris Paul because he has this ability to just settle things down. They don't call him the point guard for nothing. He does that. Now, the problem with Chris Paul being on the second unit, that with his shot not falling, and in a game like today against the Cleveland Cavaliers, if the second unit shots not falling, so if Kuminga's not shooting his shots well, Dario's not hitting the shots well, Chris Paul's value dips significantly. But when he puts that ball in the money and Gary Payton II is diving to the basket for a dunk, Chris Paul shows all his value. But if his shooters aren't shooting, it's going to be rough because he has lost his step. He's lost his bounce. The mid-range jump shot that was so money just 2 years ago, it's not hitting like it used to. And I'm, as a Chris Paul super fan, it hurts my heart to see him play sometimes. But the silver lining is that he's playing for the Warriors and they have enough talent to kind of look over the fact that he is struggling to score himself. Even he talked about it in his post-game interview that he's having the worst shooting start to his career, and it hasn't mattered because of the Golden State Warriors. Or mostly Steph Curry. The man is on a crazy run again. It makes no sense to me that he is in year 14. What is he, 35, 36 years old, and he is still looking like one of the top players in the league. Like, I want y'all to really think about where we are as NBA fans and the amount of 35-plus players in ball that are still very, very good. From Bron, who's almost 40, to Kevin Durant, who's 35, to Steph Curry, who's also 35, 36. Like, we've never in the history of ball had this many past 35-year-olds be considered top 10 players or top 15 players, even top 20 if you don't want to be generous at all. Like, we're hitting this new step in this new cycle when it comes to longevity in the league. And I think that it's only going to get better and better and better because players care more about their bodies. When you think about where Steph Curry came into the league, or even LeBron James back in 2003, that man, they weren't taking care of their bodies in the offseason. Now, LeBron is spending over $1 million annually to keep his body in shape. I'm not saying that Steph or KD are doing that much as far as that much money spent, but obviously they're more cognizant now about the way to take care of their bodies versus when those players were drafted. So imagine players of like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Luka Doncic, and so on and so forth, how good they could look at 35 with all of the medical technology, with the advanced stats and all of the tracking data to say that, oh, maybe Shai should sit out this game because this is just not bad for his knees or whatever. Steph Curry's doing his thing. But Chris Paul being able to hold things down is just different. Even Draymond Green had some quotes about the chemistry of the team just being different. How last year he didn't like coming to work and the things were awkward, woo, woo, woo. And you can't help but to make jokes about it because Draymond, you remember what you did, right? Like, how could it not be awkward after that? And I'll just leave it at that. Draymond, coming to the Kenny Beecham podcast. Let's talk about it. But Chris Paul just adds a different element. He slows things down when they need to slow it down. Even the minutes with him and Steph Curry together are at least a fun watch because Steph Curry, it's been a few players throughout the history of the league where you feel pretty good about Steph Curry coming off screens and the ball being in the right spot, like Draymond Green, Iggy, or even Sean Livingston when they played their limited amount of minutes together. They had a way of understanding the way Steph Curry moves and where he wanted the ball. Though we were talking about less than 10 game sample size between Steph Curry and Chris Paul, I'm starting to get a feel that Chris Paul is doing that as well. They don't play a ton of minutes together. Even Steve Kerr said that Chris Paul is mostly going to be running with the second unit because that's just his role. And he's embraced it, which is cool because he spent 1,300 games in his NBA career starting before his first one coming off the bench. So shout out to Chris Paul. I can see the comment section say my bias is showing, but it is the Kenny Beecham podcast. Before we get into some other gradings, it is time for Ask KB. Hashtag ASKKB if you want to be featured in the next episode. You can ask me anything, and of course, I'm not answering anything, but you can ask me anything, and I'm picking my favorites every single episode. Starting off from Mike Ben here. If you're a fan of the Kenny Beecham pod, you might know this name, Mike Ben here. He's one of the co-hosts on my other podcast. Harden said he's not a system player. He's a system. Who are the other systems in basketball? Now, the context of Harden saying this is quite interesting. I really recommend everybody going to watch his 18-minute introduction to the Clippers, and he's playing his first official game today versus the Knicks, so should be fun. But he said he's not a system player, he is a system, which scared me a little bit. It would scare me a little bit if I am a Clippers fan, but I digress. It should be interesting to see him play nonetheless. Who are the other systems in basketball? And we're talking about one-person armies, if you will, that they are the system. And I don't want you to think that because someone is very, 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 very good at basketball, that means that they are the system, because that's just not the case. Some of the best players in basketball, I'm not calling the system. Giannis, in my opinion, is not a system. Joel Embiid, in my opinion, is not a system. They're great NBA players, but they're not a system, right? I'm talking about an individual player, all right? We got to start off with the guy we just talked about in the last segment, Steph Curry. Do I need to explain anymore? The fact that he has not been able, or they have not been able to build a secondary squad to keep his net rating off the court from being good tells you everything you need to know. And we've talked, the Warriors have had so many really dominant and really good teams. And the fact there's only been 1 year where his off-net rating was positive just shows you that this man is a system in himself. The movement and so on and so forth is not for the faint of heart. We've seen people like Kelly Oubre. We've seen people like D'Angelo Russell come in and try. They can't. That man is a system, and he has been for a very long time. The next guy is Luka Doncic. I don't need to explain it. Since the first year of Luka Doncic's career, the man has been a system. He's been one of the highest usage players in all the ball, and for good reason, because the way he plays and the way he performs as that lead guard it's just a really good recipe to win games. Now, I know last year they didn't make the playoffs. There's a lot of things that go into that. He is a system in himself. I got to give credit to James Harden. I don't believe in 2023 that James Harden is a system, but prime James Harden is like the definition of a system. Like in those Houston Rocket years when it was him 5 outing with Clint Capella, diving to the basket, that is a system. And he was that. But in 2023, now he's lost a step. And he's not as good, maybe because of the quad injury or the hamstring injuries that he's dealt with, or just because of age. He's not a system anymore. So I'm going to disagree with Harden saying he's a system now. But in the past, come on, man. It's not many systems that are more effective than his, especially in the regular season. Steph Curry's system was good enough to help him win a bunch of championships. So you can make the argument that one was better. But as far as the regular season goes, James Harden's system was good. It was so good that they decided to trade everybody over 6'6", and they ran the same exact way, and they won a bunch of games still. Like, it makes no sense. So shout out to James. Prime James was an elite level player. The next system I have, And this guy is not on the tier of the other people I've talked about. Steph Curry, Luka Doncic, these are top 10 players. Nikola Jokic is on my list as well, who we'll get to in a second. These are top 10 players. Trae Young is not a top 10 player. But until this year, Trae Young was a system. There's some interesting things going on in Atlanta right now, and I think we're going to have to talk about it in the next episode. But there's some interesting things going on in Atlanta, man. I'm super excited for it because even though Trae Young is not shooting the ball well this year, they're winning games, and they're just looking different. Quinn Snyder got them looking a little bit differently. We might talk about it, but I do want to say from his sophomore year until the beginning of this year, he was a system where the goal was to just get Trae Young the ball and let him play make, run some pick and roll. He's going to find Clint. He's going to find whoever it may be. That was their system, and it was an effective one, y'all. Until last year, whenever Trae Young was on the court, whenever Trae Young was the leader of a team, they were almost a guaranteed top 7 offense, no matter the pieces. That's how effective of an offensive player Trae Young has been. And now I think they're the number 2 offense in basketball, and Trae Young is not even scoring the ball well. I'm just saying, I'm not saying. All right, cool. Next, we have Nikola Jokic, like I mentioned. His system is so much him that they decided we don't really need a point guard. Like Jamal Murray is a point guard, don't get me wrong, but like they don't need a playmake first point guard like we see across the league here and there because Jokic is that in the 7-foot frame. I don't need to explain to you. They just came off a championship run and he's still dominating. He is a system. He's so much of a system that even a year that Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. missed all of the year and it was Austin Rivers and Campazzo playoff team. Like that's a system and he is it. LeBron a little bit less in 2023, but throughout the course of LeBron's career, he has been a system where he's so much of a system that some guys like maybe Cal Korver, Darren Williams that we thought would be great fits alongside him. Not necessarily. Now in 2023, he's trying to get away from that because he's almost 40. The goal shouldn't be give the ball to LeBron to let him cook when he's almost 40. And they told us after game number 1, he's on a 28 minutes restriction, and now they can't win unless he gets 35 plus minutes per game. The next one comes from Matthew. She says, do you ever get burnt out of watching NBA games? Obviously more so towards the later part of the season. And if so, what do you do to help yourself with that as your job? That's a very good question. The answer is yes. Not now, obviously, because the season's just started, but 100%. It is a very long NBA season. I think by calendar time, it is the longest of the major sports here in America. So you're talking about from October to April in the regular season, and then to what, July for the NBA Finals. That is a long time to be watching basketball. Or I'm sorry, to June. That's a long time to be watching basketball. And yes, I do. But mostly around Jan 1. I won't lie, around Jan 1, right before the All-Star break, it does become a little bit tougher. And usually what I would do is I will have days where I don't watch any of the games. Simple. I will do the next morning, I'll go watch highlights, or I'll do this or do that, but I'm not crazily locked in all the time. You know, you might think that because of the amount of content I push out in the NBA, but it's not always the case. You know, I do have a family, I have a wife and a kid, so it's not like 6 o'clock comes here in the Central, I got to watch from 6 o'clock to 12 p.m. Now, I do want to say there are a lot of times when it is like that, but it's not always the case. So in those days where I'm like, this is a no basketball day for me, I typically like it to be a day that doesn't have like a 15-game slate or 10-game slate. Mostly the days that might have 3 to 4 games, and I'll say, nothing today, I'll catch up in the morning. And a lot of times it's either watching highlights, watching possessions of players that might have went off, reading articles, or listening to other people's podcasts to kind of stay in tune. But 100% being burnt out on something like this is pretty regular. And I think that most people that cover sports in general go through the same thing. The last question comes from Josh Got the Juice, an OG fan of the Kenny Beecham product, I guess. I put out a lot of content in my life. Build a starting lineup of players who shoot sub 30% from 3 in their career, smiley face. This is fun because obviously the 3-point shot is so very important nowadays, but it wasn't always the case. My front court was pretty easy. The front court was easy because majority of my favorite bigs in history just aren't shooters. My favorite big in history is a shooter. Shout out to Dirk, but like majority of them aren't. It was a matter of how do we put together a competent, very good team that cannot shoot. So I thought about Magic Johnson, but if you look at Magic Johnson's stats, he shot just over 30%, and I was so very mad. I decided not to include anybody that played in an era without a 3-point shot because that seems like kind of cheating, you know what I'm saying? Even if it was like Wilt Chamberlain, he probably wouldn't have been pulling from half court. But then again, it's Wilt Chamberlain. Every story we know about him is just crazy. So here's my lineup. At the 1, I got Chicago's very own Isaiah Thomas, Zeke. Bad boy Piston, Isaiah Thomas, one of the greatest of all time. I think he shot 29% from three throughout his career. So barely made it in here. But the man was an absolute dog. Though him and Michael Jordan got their things, he was one of the toughest players ever playing on that bum ankle. I mean, obviously, this was well before my time, but I've heard all the stories from the old heads in the barbershop. You feel me? He obviously gets talked about a ton here in Chicago, too, by the older guys with him being from Chicago. My number two player, and this feels wrong, but it is right. Another Chicagoan. Dwayne Wade. Another one of my favorite players of all time, a sub 30% three-point shooter. And actually, now that I'm saying that aloud, I'm starting to double question myself because I know obviously he was not a shooter, but sub 30, even the bad players got to 30. He got to 29.3. Oh, Dwayne Wade, welcome to the team. So my backcourt, Isaiah Thomas and Dwayne Wade. Chicago-centric for sure. And I'm coaching, so like we got a lot of Chi-Town love around here. So the small forward position was the hardest because all of my favorite small forwards in history can shoot. At least better than 30%, whether it be Bron, whether it be Paul George, Carmelo Anthony. They all can shoot. So I was like, okay, what if I went untraditional? Not a guy that is widely renowned as a small forward, but we've seen him play small forward before. Give me the Greek freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo as my three. And then the front court is easy for me. Tim Duncan shot less than 10% from three in his career. Less than 10% from three in his career. Shout out to Tim Duncan. And then Shaq. Shaq, the most dominant player I've ever seen. So my lineup is Zeke, the Flash, the Greek Freak, Mr. Fundamental, and Big Diesel. Now let's talk about some other players that are on new teams. We're going to go to the Houston Rockets pair of Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks, who currently sit at 2 and 3, which is pretty good for the Houston Rockets. They have a legitimate team, and their starting lineup is actually good. Now, the numbers of when they get away from that starting lineup, not as good, but they have the 17th ranked offense and the 16th ranked defense, which when you consider where the Houston Rockets were last year, as if not the worst team in the league, one of the worst teams in the league, them being middle of the pack on O, N, and D is a blessing. So I'm going to say right now, Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks get an A considering the circumstances, right? Because they're not, well, I'm sorry, Dillon Brooks is, but like Fred VanVleet, who was the $443 million man annually, whatever the number is, he's not having a crazy year. 17.8 points per game, 3.6 assists, or 3.6 rebounds, 8.8 assists, 37% from the field, 36% from three. You know what I'm saying? This is the Fred VanVleet experience, right? With him being a smaller guard and him not putting a ton of pressure on the rim, majority of his shots are going to be jump shots, so his field goal percentage is always going to be around 40%, and it has been the case for the entirety of his career. But even though his actual percentages are not crazy, he is completely holding it down. It is a dramatic change between a point guard in Fred VanVleet and not a point guard, which is what they didn't have last year. And that is the reason why they overpaid to have him. It wasn't because they thought that Fred VanVleet was worth $43 million annually, that he's worth the amount of money that, I don't know, that LeBron is making. I don't know if that's even true. But not that he should be in the top 5% in the NBA players when it comes to being paid, but instead they needed some form of stability, and Fred VanVleet brings that for them, at least so far. And Dillon Brooks is the reason why this is an A. He is averaging 17.8 points as well, 4.4 rebounds, and 2.4 assists on 60% from the field, 60% from three, and 93% from the free throw line. The rare 60-60-90 club. Now, obviously, I don't need to say this, but this is not sustainable. This is not the Dillon Brooks you and I know. But my major gripe with Dillon Brooks over the last 2 years of his career specifically wasn't the fact that he does too much on the court, where he's extra and getting in people's face. I don't really mind that part. It was the fact that he felt like he deserved 15 shots a game. Especially after the breakout of Dillon Brooks of Desmond Bane over the last couple of years, and John Morant being his talent, and Jaren Jackson Jr. being his talent. The fact that we still got 15 shots a game from Dillon Brooks was just mind-blowing, because he was one of the least efficient players in all of basketball. Again, I don't believe he's going to be 60-60-90, but we've seen his usage go down significantly, where he's attempting like 10 shots a game, and that is like a sweet spot for Dillon Brooks, because he's already going to bring the defense. He made all defensive team last year, if you don't remember. He's already going to bring that. So if he is giving you 10 shots a game and he's at least decently efficient, that is a good player. And he's been really, really, really good. When they're on the court together, they have a real lineup. And you need that there in Houston. Because before this, it was a lot of chaos. Ime Udoka got these boys settled down. And though you haven't seen the breakouts that you might have wanted from a Jabari Smith Jr. or Jalen Green or this player or that player, the fact that you have these two vets in the locker room and these two vets on the court is going a very long way, where you have 2 wins early into the season. And even one of their losses was against Victor Wembanyama in overtime, where he took over. So it's like, this team has potential, and they have these steady vets to play. They're even playing guys like Jeff Green or Reggie Bullock just getting minutes here and there. And though the numbers don't say it's working, it's just different than last year, where everybody on your roster was sub 23 years old and all tried to get theirs. Now, there's still a few players on their roster that's trying to get theirs, but the fact that Freddie is here giving you almost 9 assists a game from the PG position, and Dillon Brooks is helping instill this culture of defense, that's all you can really ask for. So I'm giving it an A as well. Again, is it the same as Jrue Holiday and Porzingis? No, but they're graded on a different scale, considering this is a rebuilding team versus Jrue Holiday and Porzingis. Maybe I'll get an A+. Maybe I'll get an A+. I don't know. Because now, again, this feels weird to put Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet in the same tier as Jrue and Porzingis. I'm going to keep it. Both get A's. All right. The next guy I want to talk about is Bradley Beal. I wanted to. But we can't, because he hasn't played just yet, and they desperately need him now. Luckily, it's a long season. We do this thing of overreacting this early in the season, but this is kind of the way things go. And I didn't really think about it last year, how like the Sacramento Kings started off 0-4, and the LA Lakers were like 1-5 to start the year. There are a lot of things that happened early last year that completely got washed over by halfway through the season. And I'm assuming that's going to be the case too. So though the Phoenix Suns are starting off slowish, obviously not to the caliber they anticipated, with Bradley Beal coming back, I'm sure they'll get into the swing of things. Let's talk about his teammate though, Jusuf Nurkic. In the moment in time, I did not like the trade. I tried to be the silver lining guy, tried to play devil's advocate and try to point out the few positives of the Jusuf Nurkic experience, but it's been bad, y'all. I'm giving it, I got it as C-. I might give it a D+. See, let's say C- because that's what's in my notes. The one of the problems with Jusuf Nurkic is, for a guy that is 7 foot, he does not finish at the rim. He is finishing 52% at the rim, and that is the 4th worst amongst all bigs in basketball. And the people that he's behind is Mitchell Robinson, who's historically one of the most effective when it comes to in paint. So I'm assuming that Mitchell Robinson is going to get his percentages up. Xavier Tillman, who's overtaxed as a starting center right now, and Karl Anthony Towns. Those are the 3 people shooting worse at the rim than him at the center position, at the big position, and then it's him. And the thing that those 3 dudes have in common is they have a history of being good at the rim. Jusuf Nurkic has not had one above average finishing year in his entire career, and you're seeing it again here. It's so bad that in the second game versus the Spurs, he got completely benched for Jrue Eubanks. It's not ideal. He has his moments of brilliance where there's a couple possessions where you can see the playmaking, and that was one of the reasons why I traded for him, right? Because he has the playmaking a level above Deandre Ayton. I cannot deny that. But nonetheless, it's only in spurts. And when you talk about playmaking, it's just not necessarily as important from that 5 position, because what we've seen from a healthy Devin Booker so far, he's taken over that role as a playmaker, the playmaker. He still sets really good screens and this and that, but defensively, he's not there, and he doesn't finish at the rim. So if your one thing that you're holding your hat on is that he could pass a little bit, it just feels weird. Again, I do want to say, I'm going to assume that trading Deandre Ayton, it was not just like, oh, we think that Jusuf Nurkic is better, but that the relationship between Deandre Ayton and the Suns were well done, so we had to do something, and this is the best we could get. I do not like the Jusuf Nurkic experience so far. Jrue Eubanks, it feels better on the court. They've even gone small ball down the stretch in a few of their games, so it's just not the most beautiful experience, and I don't know if it will get better. Again, early in the season, I think the first 2 games of the year, he was looking good. Has not sustained himself, though. So let's talk about Deandre Ayton, who flip spots with him, flip teams. I'm going to be very, very candid with this one and the next one. The Portland Trail Blazers have not been a team that I've watched a ton this year. There's so many other teams to watch that I'm sorry, Trailblazer fans, especially after Scoot Henderson got injured. I'm like, yeah, oh no. But Shane Sharp has been hooping. I've been watching Shane Sharp's possessions and his defense and trying to figure out where he lands on there. But as far as DeAndre Ayton goes, I watched their last game versus the Memphis Grizzlies, and this was my takeaways. The defense looks really good. Now, there's a time when he played for the Suns, the playoff series versus the Pelicans, where this is a series that either Chris Paul or Devin Booker got injured. One of the two, I don't remember because it's been a few years now. But I solely believe that series was won based on DeAndre Ayton's defense and his aggression in that series. But since then, we haven't seen that defensive impact from DeAndre Ayton. I mean, in spurts for sure, but as far as full term, we haven't. And in the game I watched against the Memphis Grizzlies, I saw that same defensive intensity. And again, because I haven't watched every single game of the year, I don't know if that's holding for the first 5 games previously, but in the one game that I watched and I honed in on him, I saw the defensive impact. We obviously know he's always going to be one of the better rebounders in all of basketball. The thing is, and I'm just looking at the numbers here, the usage rate has fallen off a cliff, especially if we look at the early part of the season where he was averaging like 6 points per game. Part of that is because when you have the young guards that they do in Scoot Henderson and Shane Sharp, and every time is a positive playmaker, but for the most part, super young players, it's just harder to get players involved. Now they have Malcolm Brogdon running the show, and Brogdon is a guy that's going to get his, that's for sure. But DeAndre Ayton saw his usage percentage be at 20% last year. And again, he's playing with Devin Booker and Chris Paul, who are guys that we believe that DeAndre Ayton maybe deserved more touches, but he didn't get them. And now you compare that to his point guard core. Now you're like, man, I kind of miss playing with Chris Paul because he got me the ball. I kind of miss playing with Devin Booker because he got me the ball. But we haven't seen him say anything about it. He's completely bought into Portland, which is a good thing. 20% usage rate dropped all the way down to 14, y'all. So he's not getting the shot attempts. He's not getting the looks that he used to, but he's happy. And that's all that matters. The next guy and the last guy, as far as big acquisitions, is Jordan Poole. At the top of the show, I said we were going to go from Damian Lillard to Jordan Poole, insinuating that Jordan Poole was going to be an F or something along those lines. Guess what Jordan Poole has? IDK. Because I have not watched the Wizards. I have not sat down and watched a full Wizards game this season. And you want to know why? Do you want to know why? There was a game early this season where Daniel Gafford was out with an injury. And they started a lineup of Jones, Poole, Bilal Coulibaly, Denny Abdia, and Kyle Kuzma. That five, no big man. I was like, oh yeah, I'm intrigued. I even tweeted. I quoted the tweet with the eyes emoji. I'm intrigued. Them boys gave up 50 points in the first quarter. And I was out. That was a game versus the Celtics. And if you look at the box score there, I think the Celtics only won by 8 or something. They were down by 30. You know, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown didn't play the fourth quarter. I watched that one quarter. I was like, I can't do it. I've seen the highlights of him throwing it off the backboard right down by 20. I've seen him try to size up Kristaps Porzingis to shoot over him, and Kristaps Porzingis got the block. The experience is one not for me. I'd rather watch it in highlights or lowlights, if you will, and leave it at that. So I don't know for Jordan Poole. Is he playing well? Is he not? I mean, I can look at numbers, but obviously numbers don't tell a full story. So I just won't. I'm going to give him I don't know. Here are my honorable mentions, though, because there are some less significant signings, at least from the offseason, that are tearing it up. Christian Wood has been amazing. And the Lakers, not so much. But Christian Wood has been amazing. When he was signed, I was trying to tell people on Twitter, relax, okay? As a guy that has watched a good amount of Christian Wood in his career, he's not a dude that I would expect to be playing heavy minutes when it matters, fourth quarter / playoffs, because he doesn't defend well. One thing he can do is score. Score with the best of them, actually. The guy is a bucket. But it's a lot more to basketball than that, especially from the big position. Well, so far, he's made me look like a fool because he has completely bought into the defensive side of the ball. It took him 6 teams and 6 years, but here he is, y'all. Christian Wood, positive defender. The one game recently versus the Clippers, he was everywhere. And same thing with Cam Reddish, who I also give an honorable mention shout out to. Defensively, both of those guys have been looking really good, and those are players that haven't been known for that in their careers. Sometimes it's right place, right team, and though he signed on a minimum, it may have taken that for him to really buy into that side. And in that one game versus the Clippers, things got real crazy because Darvin Ham ran a lineup and I kid you not, please go back and rewatch the game if you think I'm kidding, that had a front court of Christian Wood, Anthony Davis, and Jackson Hayes. He played minutes with that, and they went on, what, a 9-2 run with that lineup. Darvin Ham's crazy. What coach is doing that? Darvin is, I guess. And that was one of the better games of the year. I really love that game. And Christian Wood came in clutch. I think he hit a big shot. He had a big dunk, and he played some good defense. So shout out to Christian Wood. The next was Kelly Oubre, another player that signed for a minimum to the Philadelphia 76ers. He's been filling it up. A team that desperately needed a little extra scoring punch, and he's doing that. Kelly Oubre has been a guy that can score, but it's not that has never really been a question for Kelly Oubre. It's about all the other stuff, and I can't say completely that the other stuffs are coming along, but they need scoring on that team, and he's providing that. Next was Grant Williams. Shout out to Grant Williams. Shout out to him. One of the homies. I've been talking to him recently. You know what I'm saying? All right. He's been amazing. I love to see a player, and I want to talk to him about this. A player that was kind of relegated to one goal and one role, right? Sit in the corner, hit threes, play defense. He's so much more than that now. Now, he does still sit in the corner and hit threes, but he's also hitting threes on the wing. He's involved in the action. So I want to talk to him about, transitioning to that style of player, because obviously when you're in college and in high school, you go from the guy to being a role player, 7th, 8th man in a rotation, to a starter on one of the better teams in the league. And he's holding it down. He's shooting it very efficiently. He's hitting the shots. He's playing great defense. He is the 3rd best player on the Mavericks right now, which is great. And then my last honorable mention, as far as giving him a shout out, is Dennis Schroeder. The man over there. I can't say the man in Toronto, because Scotty Barnes, have you seen Scotty Barnes? He's been amazing. The point guard over there, getting people in the way they should be. He's playing truly point guard right now, and he's shooting 60% from 3. And I don't think that's sustainable either, but he's hitting the shots and he's playmaking like crazy, so he deserves an honorable mention. And in the comment section, you can hit me up on Twitter and tell me who I'm forgetting as far as honorable mentions go with signings. Like Bruce Brown, who I kind of looked over in my notes. Bruce Brown, honorable mention. There are a lot of players. Now it's time to reintroduce producer Greg, because today we're trying to figure out if these hot takes are hot or not.
First, the Toronto Raptors need to blow it up before the deadline.
The Toronto Raptors are in a position where I won't even call it blow it up. I would say retool. Scotty Barnes right now is him. That year 3 leap for him is real. And he's benefiting from the new system that Darko, last name, has put into play. But also guys like Pascal Siakam has kind of got lost. OG Anunoby still an all-defensive player. So I would call it more of a retooling than a rebuild, because I do like a lot of their pieces there, but it all doesn't fit perfectly around Scotty. And I think that's where your mindset has to be right now. So I'm going to say this is not a hot take. It's just not a take I agree with.
Jalen Johnson is solidified as the Hawks starting small forward of the future.
Not a hot take at all. Jalen Johnson, one of the first episodes of the Kenny Beecham podcast, I talked about my 7 most intriguing players in ball, and Jalen Johnson was one of them once. And so far, he's been amazing. And I'm going to say we're going to talk about more Atlanta Hawks in the future. I'm going to say not a hot take. This is a spot-on take. Jalen Johnson is the wing of the future for the Atlanta Hawks.
The Celtics will have 3 All-Stars.
Not a hot take, man. The Jays are almost solidified because they're just that good. And as long as the Boston Celtics are on top of the conference, come All-Star voting, I do believe that Porzingis is going to get his first All-Star appearance in many years. He's been that impactful. Not a hot take.
The Clippers are the best team in California.
Whoa. The Clippers are the best team in California. I'm going to say that's not a hot take. I don't know if I agree with it, though. There's a lot of great teams. I still feel good about the Warriors, man. The Kings are going to struggle a little bit now that De'Aaron Fox is out. I'm going to say it's not a hot take, but it's not a take that I agree with. Hit me up and let me know who I forgot about when it comes to these big acquisitions. Do you agree with my grading system? Because we gave out a lot of A's. Listen, I'm a generous grader. What can I say? You know what I'm saying? Everybody's on a different curve. Shout out to everybody, man. Leave a like, subscribe. 5 stars is really appreciated. Next time I talk to you, I want to be in the top 5 of sports podcasts. I don't know if we're going to get there, but your help can mean a lot. Thank y'all. I'll see y'all in a couple days. Peace.